What song of his would you would you take if you could only take one song?
I would take I Don't Know What It Is. Just because it just, for me, it just musically, lyrically, and emotionally just gets me every time. And it's the one I love to sing along to. And it's just when you think you know the chord change, something else happens, and it hit a spot with me. The song about his dad on the last track on One is pretty, it's pretty amazing. I mean, it's a difficult, but I don't know what it is. I would have to say that.
I don't think it feels over complex, but God, there's so much detail in that. I mean, as a producer, without question, that's the biggest multi-track I've ever worked on, and I'm not known for my simplicity when it comes to that sort of thing. But it was huge.
I've always been mystified why I Don't Know What It Is hasn't been a huge hit single, and I feel like that is definitely a great way into getting into Rufus's music, because it has all the characteristics, the very kind of honest songwriting, great melody, great kind of pop melody as much as anything else, and obviously the sound of the song doing what it does, going from so small to so big, but I mean it's a great pop song, which is a fantastic thing, and for you and I, obviously it's a way in, but I wish more people were given that chance, because there's so much to discover once you get into listening to his music.
I mean, Rufus and I are not very good at restraining each other. so I always felt there was a danger that we'd come out with something that was just ludicrously overproduced, and possibly to some people's tastes we did, but I'm very comfortable listening to it. I think we got it just about right.
Yeah, no, I wrote that song a long time. I mean, not a long, well, about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe, or 4 years ago. I can't remember. I mean, Gay Messiah is, on one hand, a joke. On the other hand, a protest song. And finally, now that, the conservatives in America have really, grabbed the basket, it's a bit of a prayer. It's a bit of a literal demand for some sort of divine intervention to try to, just bring back some sense of tolerance. I mean, I don't sing, I feel like, I do live in a tolerant society. I mean, I live in New York, and I don't really encounter that much difficulty in that world. But I sense, I feel that it's very important to be vigilant, and it's very important to kind of, guard those rights dearly. Because, it's funny, I often think about how, the song, and the song being about, gay issues and being overtly, kind of, daring and quite, lewd. I think it's important to have songs like that, and it's important to to be able to sing them. I mean, maybe not on, morning television, but certainly, just to have it out there.
He's had that song for a while. He had that song for a while, even before we were recording Want One, and it had become a bit of a favourite at the shows. And, that was actually one of the easy ones. That really was. The way that came into being is almost all I can say about it was that we were there in Bearsville and we had a great band and we played it 2 or 3 times and bang, that was it. Didn't have to do much to that. We added some backing vocals and we did a few overdubs. Maybe because he'd been playing it for so long live, or maybe just we were lucky, or some songs just turn out that way. That was a real performance. That was a photograph of a moment where everything fell into place. It's nice when that happens, as a producer, those are the moments you dream of.
Well, I think it's one of the best songs off Want To, which is my favorite record of his. it's just a beautiful song. It's so funny because Gay Messiah is a song that, that I'll play for my mother, and she just absolutely loves it. That's the great thing about Rufus too, is that, there are songs like Gay Messiah that are anybody will listen to it and absolutely love it, and don't necessarily, it's there if you listen for it, but I think it's a really good example of one of his most beautiful songs, probably. But maybe one of his most, I don't want to say shocking, but maybe one of his most explicit. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous song.
The directness again of Rufus's sometimes slightly hysterically naughty lyrics is very refreshing, I think. I remember at a gig in Camden earlier this year when he sang Gay Messiah and got to the line, baptized in cum, and he actually just went, bleh. I think he's disgusted himself by that stage. But his real triumph was in convincing a gospel group in North London to sing that line. I don't know how he did that. Tea and biscuits, probably.
and so that's sort of a bit what that song is about too. Is to kind of sort of counteract some of that religiosity that swirls around gay issues, which when you go to the core to it is quite it's quite non-forgiving, So it's sort of just keep that alive.
It's my favorite song still. I mean, of all the songs, just magical. Just, even, we added strings and arrangements on it, but I think just the piano thing is amazing by itself.
Poses, I think to me it's just an amazing song because it's him. He really captures himself very well in that song, the song Poses. And it has that kind of sadness, or not just, kind of a sadness to it.
I don't know if I can describe it in words. It's just beautiful. Cigarettes and Chocolate Milk was never my favorite, and it seems to be like I never catch those, the hits that much. My favorite is always like the B-side or the obscure song. But I don't know. Poses is like a classical inspired Tchaikovsky song. I don't know.
Wandering around New York and feeling a bit pissed and annoyed, with the state of the world and the state of his career and stuff, and the way he feels about himself. It's just a great thing. That's what lots of people do. You have your bad days where you feel you can't cope with stuff, and you sort of get drunk and wander around and wonder when it will ever get better. But it's perfectly documented in that song. But it also is very kind of poetic and imaginative, and so it does have an intellectual side to it. But I think you can nevertheless pick up the message of the song very easily.
Poses also was an interesting album in terms of, Rufus discussing the idea of his own celebrity, exploring the idea of the experiences that he'd had, some of which were a little frightening, but almost like wandering around in this Vanity Fair of experience. He made it sound exciting and compelling, and the idea of poses, of assuming various kinds of identities almost that are within yourself, but that maybe you didn't even know were there. So there was a sense of vertigo about it, but there was also a kind of sense of exhilaration about it.
I have a lot of favorites because I think they're all good. They have things of brilliance in them that I find are just beautiful, just really, really musical, something you can sink your teeth into and just really enjoy. So, yes, I can't pick one single one. But I suppose Poses is pretty close. Yeah.
It's sort of the odd one out on Want To, because the version that you hear on Want To is actually a live recording, which we then added stuff to. But the truth of the art teacher was that it was born at Carnegie Hall when Rufus and I went and performed a couple of songs there, including Agnus Dei, which is the first piece of music on Want To, for the Free Tibet concert that they have yearly there, and we went, and Philip Glass was the musical director of the evening, and I remember Philip who played a couple of his own pieces, was in there doing his sound check and doing his, dung 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 thing that Philip does. And I was standing there watching with a couple of people, and someone said to me, "Do you know he practices for an hour a day with a click track?" And I said, "Good." But I mean, he's remarkable. No one does that stuff better than Philip. And Rufus was watching, and he seemed to go a bit distant, and I could see something forming in his head. And a week later, we were up at Bearsville, and I overheard him just sort of playing something on the piano whilst we were doing something in the control room, and there was the same dung 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 dung. I thought, he's playing like Philip. And then a day or so later, he announced, "Yeah, I've got a new song," and he went in and he played it, and it sort of dung 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 dung, and it was the art teacher, sprung fully formed out of the box, and it's such a charming song that, Okay, it's funny and melancholy at the same time. It's a beauty.
Why is it live?
Because he just did this version of it that he fell in love with. He'd recorded a few shows during his American tour, and we'd attempted on one or two occasions to capture it in the studio, and we'd experimented with doing it slower, doing it faster, and we had a few ideas for things we might add to it, but nothing really seemed to stick. It was difficult just to settle on how the song should be. And he brought these two live versions into the studio and said, "Have a listen to these," and they were both pretty great, but the one, I think it was from Montreal, that we used, you listened to it from beginning to end, and you got to the end of it and you felt, well, what was wrong with that? Why wouldn't that be the version on the record? We've got so many other things to do in such a short period of time. Why don't we just use this, because it sounds great. It captures the song, and I think it's nice to have something live on the record, because the making of the records is only half of what Rufus does. He's such a charismatic and remarkable live performer. It felt right that something on there should be live.
I think the one for me that's really got to me is the art teacher. Actually, I think that's an incredible song. Initially, I thought, this is Rufus being very gay and saying, "I remember my art teacher," but from what I can work out, it's not actually from his perspective or point of view. It's from the point of view of a woman, I think. Anyway, I may be wrong about this. This is only a theory, but it seems like it's from the point of view of a girl who's at school who fancies her art teacher, and she then grows up and ends up marrying an executive company head. I think this is right. Are you following me on this? And I may be completely wrong. He owns a Turner, but she remembers the day when she was in love, and it was the only time she was ever in love, and it was when she saw the art teacher, and when she was with the art teacher looking at a Turner in the museum, and it sort of bookends the song with looking at the two paintings, and it's just pure genius. I mean, to see something from that perspective, if indeed that is what he's seeing it from, it just is an incredible way of seeing things, and an incredible way of telling a story through a song, which I wish I could do, but I can't.
Go Ahead was if I were to make a list in order of the favourite tracks I've ever worked on as a producer, that would be almost certainly top of it. That's the one I'm proudest of. I think it's an extraordinarily written song. The lyric is amazing. Once again, it was very much I know it ended up feeling huge, and it had lots of produced and stacked backing vocals on the top of it, but at the heart of it, there's just a wonderful band performance of the song. I never expected that Rufus and I would make a rock song like that. I knew we'd be plundering all sorts of genres, but that was a place that I didn't expect to go. And I can't really claim credit for that. I imagined that Go Ahead would be. I remember being slightly worried about it because it felt a bit too much like Want, like the song Want. I thought, is there going to be space on the album for two songs that are sort of the same temperature, like they were at the time? And he walked into the studio in Bearsville one day and said, "No, we're going to do this. We're going to go big on this one." So I said, "Okay, let's try it." And we got Matt to really, hit the drums hard, and it took half an hour before I realised that this was going to be spectacular. And Rufus was like, "Oh, it's not going to. Maybe this isn't going to work. Maybe." And I said, "No, relax with this one. This is actually going to be quite magnificent." But I could talk for hours about the way that song was produced and the way it was arranged and who played on it. But it's a miracle of a song.
Many Rufus songs start with a very simple melody and little piano thing, and then they kind of build and build and build and build to a crescendo, which then goes down again, back to where you started from. I mean, that's a typical trajectory of a Rufus song, actually. And you think, wow, it's going to go sort of further up the melody. That's a typical thing that he does. That's sort of more of a rock thing, though, in a way. But it's a rock thing mixed with a classical thing.
Well, the virtue of starting as simple as that is that you can make the climb up to the top of the mountain extremely steep or extremely long. And it starts about as small as anything on that record, and it gets about as big. It's a grand gesture, It's a big statement, and I think it earns its right to be a big statement because the message embedded within it is so strong. I have to, for me, I think, looking back on how it came into being, The One You Love feels, again, like it was one of the more straightforward ones. That was very much one that we set the microphones up, and we had great players, and they played it, and bang, there it was. And for a long time, that was how that song existed. We didn't add anything to it for a while. The vocals, the backing vocals that eventually got added to it were something we came to quite late in the second half of the proceedings when we were finishing off Want To. I suppose, we did get. I mean, the backing vocals got quite complicated. But I don't hear it that way. That feels like one of the simple ones. I would bracket that with Gay Messiah as one that was just one of the organic ones that we just sprinkled stuff on.
That was one of the fastest songs I've ever done with Rufus because I'm singing his same melody line, so it didn't take very long to learn. I think I came in. I don't know if it was. No, it wasn't at nighttime. That was the other song. But, it was coming in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I was gone out of there by 4:30 or something. Because Rufus is, a taskmaster, which it's great as a singer because you just go in, what do you want, and we just do it. And so I think that's a great use of my voice, and I'm really glad that they mix it that high and that he asked me to do that.
I wrote that a while ago as well, and that was one of the ones that was tracked during Want One, during that session with Lee Von Helm on drums. And I don't know, it was written. I mean, it was definitely written at a point in my life when I was quite confused emotionally about the nature of love and the dichotomy between love and sex. It's very, because at the point I was kind of desperately trying to maintain some kind of relationship with someone, and it was always sort of being interrupted by just my roving eye, which I'll always have, and I kind of felt I was very guilty about it, and I was also very like, for instance, I thought everybody had that issue, and and I just, it's a song basically about temptation and how temptation is almost a kind of it's like a ghost or something that sort of comes in and just makes everyone it brings despair. I've since, and certainly at the time when I was writing, I mean, temptation involved with narcotics, involved with, the music business was becoming quite a little soup, and very confusing. And there was a lot of people sort of, and I was at the time really in need of just someone to, to just love me and for me to love someone else. But I wasn't going to get it at that point. I've since, realized that, there were other issues that I had to kind of settle first before I could kind of get the prize.
Well, I love that song. I love it for Livon Helm's drumming on it, which is just so, so heavy and so full of personality. And it's almost as close to a pop song as Rufus gets, isn't it? Now, what can I tell you about Beautiful Child? He says, remembering Beautiful Child. There's an extraordinary quality to the way Rufus sings that. Like it's right on the edge of it. He's almost screaming it from the get-go. And it has this sort of Appalachian sort of feel to it, and that it's, melodically, it feels a little bit like a folk song, but it's got this sort of thunderous sort of undercurrent. So it felt like some sort of Appalachian heavy metal hybrid that we were crazy enough to try and concoct. It's got a phenomenal energy. Matt's drumming on that is tremendous. This sort of cyclical thing that he does all the way through it. It's quite brilliant. That was one of our more adventurous backing vocal escapades, I think. We filled up close to 200 tracks on that before we decided that enough was enough. That was a 16-hour backing vocal session. And one of the ones where, however tired we were getting, Rufus would keep saying, we just need 3 more tracks here, and, I want to try this. And those were some of those moments I was mentioning earlier where he'd go, no, that's not going to work, that's not going to work. Shit, it's working, So that was Beautiful Child. He's been playing it at the end of his set with the band. It's a great way to close a concert as well. Yeah.
Well, I wrote that a long time ago, and it's about, originally I wanted to, the sort of opening, musical idea, those sort of little, where is my da-da-da-da-da-da, that whole thing, with those chords underneath it. It was originally kind of taken from a kind of French, medieval sounding, thought, and it was originally going to be in French, the song, and quite slow, like kind of a plaintive, almost kind of John Dowland type, medieval ditty, and I'd sort of written it that way, and then, or just that motif, and then I, at the time I was traveling, I think, through the northwest, like Portland, Seattle area, and I was having, a ball of a time, and I remember I was in Portland. Lots happened to me in Portland for some weird reason. I find Portland a very inspiring city. But I was there, and I'd witnessed someone. In downtown Portland, there's a lot of kind of trashy hotels for sailors, because it's Portland, and they go stay there, and needless to say, there is that sort of Gus Van Sant, romantic poverty thing going on. I mean, it's a very romantic city in a kind of low rent kind of way, and so I was there, and at one point I remember looking up at one of the windows, and someone was like throwing out their luggage from the window directly down to the street. I mean, they obviously had to leave, or they were being evicted, or they had to go on to the next thing. And I think it was a couple of junkies, and they were just sort of not using the elevator, obviously, and it just struck me as this kind of situation which I would pine for, which was to be completely destitute and living in a horrible hotel, and sort of waiting for that sort of mythical savior, almost like in a Querelle kind of Fassbinder kind of way, to kind of come and save you from the Threepenny Opera or something. So I was very So I think for a moment I just sort of put myself in that hotel room as I was looking at it, and sort of created this little vignette around that situation. At the same time, I had actually been having an affair with someone in Hollywood at a hotel at the Roosevelt, actually, and we were it was just due to the nature, I couldn't keep it going because I had to tour all the time. So I was then very I sort of put him in at the end. That was Marigold. So yeah, but that's sort of what happened with that song.
Is Rufus gay? I had no idea. I think his sexuality is intrinsic to him as an artist. I think we're in a very different world to how it used to be, but at the same time, there are obviously still a lot of pressures for a commercial artist. But I think we've long gone past the idea that Rufus was going to be on the chart show every week. I mean, he's not that kind of performer, and so his sexuality, I think, is key to how he views the world, how he's experienced the world, some of the pain that he's had. And what he sort of communicates through his art. It's indivisible, really. And he's not the sort of person who would ever have had any mileage or any desire, I think, to have pretended. And it's obviously a very good thing that he's able to be so upfront and then still get a major recording deal, which wouldn't have been the case not that long ago.
I love that one too. It was a fun one to record. A little Beatlesque, I think. Yeah, it's very different from a lot of the other ones he's done.
That was a song actually which I had to pick up by the scruff of its neck a little bit in the early stages, because it was, when it existed just as an acoustic guitar and voice song, it was quite difficult to get. It certainly didn't sort of become anyone else's favourite song in the sort of circle of people who were listening to the material. And of all of the songs in one, that was the one that I knew needed to have a groove to work. It needed to really pulse. And so I sort of, in the early days of that, I said to Rufus, just give me that for a day or two and let me mess with it. And I came up with the idea of putting that sort of square snare drum groove underneath it and the basic bass line idea. It was a difficult song to finish. We had to really kind of poke that one around and mess with the arrangement, and even we mixed it twice before we really got it right. And the third mix was a mix where we actually stripped a lot of it out and emptied the beginning of it, because having we established this sort of metronomic and quite propulsive groove for it, but then the song tended to flatline. It tended to become too much of a linear experience and feel too repetitive. So we had to drastically kind of fillet the beginning of that song at the final mix. Turned out good in the end, but that was one of the ones which didn't. The magic of it wasn't all created in the studio. We certainly had to mess with it to make it work.
That was a great one to get to listen to first. I mean, obviously it's quite late on in the record, but to have that sort of thrown at you as the first song you ever hear that he's done, I think is interesting because that is a very simple song. It's not, it isn't, huge orchestras and blazing brass sections or whatever. It's basically just him on the piano, and coming from that kind of field of music, I think that probably would have appealed to me anyway. But it's a very simple song, in terms of what it does sonically and the way it's recorded or whatever. But the emotional content, the lyrical content, is what grabs you. It's immediately you can pick up what the story's about. It's about a fight he's had with his dad and what he wants to say to him and what he feels he wants to say. And I did read somewhere that he was very worried about playing it to his dad, but actually his dad said it was a great song. And I think that kind of honesty that he has in his music is something that really appeals to me. Just to be able to say, I was so angry, when we had this fight, and I want to express that in a song. And I think that's a really rare quality in a songwriter. I think there are a lot of people who go around writing music these days that's kind of very cliched and probably draws on stuff that they've heard on old records 30 years ago, or it's not really about them, it's about an attitude or about angst or about being something that they're not. But I think that's a great thing about Rufus Wainwright, is that his music is so honest and so personal.
Dinner at 8, I literally forgot after I wrote it. I wrote it while I was writing Poses, and I could have probably sung it on Poses, but I wrote it, thought it was perhaps too personal and too kind of cutting and painful to sort of handle at that point, and then forgot about it.
When it first came out, when I first heard it, I wept every time I heard it. Now I'm too tired of crying, and so I try not to read into it as much, and I try and let the song just sort of flow over me, because otherwise, I'd be down on the ground in tears and need a gurney to get out of the theater. If I had to think about all the things, every time my dad sings about us, or a song like Dinner at 8, which is actually very much like a Loudon Wainwright song in that it speaks very honestly about a family member, we'd all be, I'd be in an insane asylum.
It's hard, I can't tell. It's hard to say how interesting to see how Loudon felt about the song. I have no idea how he felt about the song, like whether or not he was touched by it, kind of, or what, or just. But I think it's very good that Rufus, it's kind of cathartic. He kind of got it out of his system and moved on from there. Because I don't think you can dwell on those things, forever.
I've listened to that song on the side of the stage with my dad. My dad standing there, sort of, and I can feel the male tightness, in his bones, and and I don't want to fall apart and hug and kiss the guy, because that's not what he wants, So I just have to try and keep it together, and it's it's very affecting, the song, and that's great for Rufus. And not only that, but I think that most importantly, in many ways, is that I think that it's been very therapeutic for Rufus, maybe, to write that song and to sing it every night. It's a purging of sorts of a lot of feelings that he has.
We tried to do a cover of Dinner at 8 for a radio session in America, and I couldn't do it. I just I wasn't good enough. You know, the control and the vibrato, and the way in which he kind of just expresses the phrase. And it's mind-bogglingly hard to copy.
That's very indicative of my father. I mean, he's a very very emotional man who has to kind of maintain a certain amount of coldness and personal space in order to just, you know, kind of carry along that sort of that sensitivity. You know, it's the way he is.